Hello, my name is Sophie. I spent 5 years studying at night, working full-time, raising my children, dreaming of the moment they'd watch me walk across that stage. But when the day came, 6 seats I saved for them stayed empty. My husband, my parents, even my kids. They all chose my sister's birthday cruise instead. And just when I thought the humiliation couldn't cut deeper, my sister sent me a message. Nobody remembers graduations anyway. What do you do when your own family erases you like you never mattered? I had been waiting for this moment for what felt like a lifetime. 5 years of late nights hunched over textbooks while the rest of the house slept. 5 years of juggling conference calls with parent-teacher meetings and endless hours trying to convince myself that it was worth it, that someday it would mean something. My graduation wasn't just about a degree. It was proof that every sacrifice, every night I tucked my kids in over FaceTime instead of at their bedsides, every dinner Lumen reheated while I sat in class, none of it had been in vain. As I sipped my morning coffee that early spring day in Chicago, I thought of how it might feel to walk across that stage, the applause, the flash of cameras, my children's eyes lighting up with pride. For once, I wouldn't just be Mom or Lumen's wife or Avon and Isolde's responsible daughter. I would be Sophie, the one who had clawed her way through exhaustion to achieve something extraordinary. Family is supposed to be your first cheerleaders, not your biggest critics, I reminded myself, repeating the line like a prayer. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to trust that this time they would show up. Weeks before the ceremony, a neat envelope arrived with 6 golden tickets, literally, printed with a glossy sheen and my name embossed at the bottom. I held them as if they were relics, spreading them across the kitchen table like cards in a high-stakes game. 6 seats, 1 for Lumen, 2 for Bryson and Malus, 1 each for my parents, and 1 for my sister Callista, my circle of witnesses, my people. That evening, after dinner, I placed an envelope in front of Lumen. I want you right in front, so when I walk across, I see my people. He glanced up from his phone, offered a distracted smile, and slid the envelope to the side. Of course, he said, but he never opened it. Later, I tucked an envelope into Bryson's backpack. He rolled his teenage eyes. 3 hours of names being called. Sounds thrilling, he muttered. I brushed off the sting, telling myself that he'd understand when he saw me on stage. Malus, at least, squealed with delight when I handed her hers, though within minutes she was back to her coloring book, humming to herself. I drove across town to my parents' bungalow. My father accepted the ticket with a polite nod, my mother with a perfunctory, "We'll be there, sweetheart." No questions about the time, no smile, no hug, just words tossed into the air, flimsy and weightless. The hardest part was with Callista. She opened the envelope, studied the ticket like it was a bill she hadn't planned on paying, then smiled thinly. Of course, sis, we wouldn't miss it. But I'd heard that same line my whole life, from birthdays they skipped for golf tournaments to school plays overshadowed by Callista's more important piano recitals. Their promises always sounded convincing in the moment. Still, I tucked away the unease like a scrap of paper in my pocket. One night, a few days later, I walked past the kitchen counter and saw Lumen's envelope still lying there, unopened, smudged with coffee rings. My stomach dropped. He had said yes too easily, like someone agreeing to recycle a pamphlet. I whispered to myself, they said yes too easily, like words tossed into the wind. It was just a ticket, I told myself. But a ticket meant presence. A ticket meant care. Then came the group chat. Our family group text, the one we had used for years to share birthday photos and awkward jokes, suddenly lit up late one evening. Callista had posted glossy photos of cruise brochures, deck chairs lined with fresh towels, lobster dinners under chandeliers, and a captain in his crisp white uniform smiling into the camera. "Dad's birthday bash," she wrote, followed by a string of champagne and confetti emojis. Isolde replied instantly, "So exciting." He deserves it. Avon sent 3 thumbs-up icons. Bryson, who had clearly been looped into the chat, added, "That pool looks amazing." Even Malus, with her childish eagerness, sent a row of heart emojis. And the replies kept pouring in. Enthusiasm bouncing from one family member to the next, each message feeding the next wave of glee. I sat there staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Finally, I typed, "Don't forget, my graduation is May 15th at 2 p.m. The bubble appeared, disappeared. Then the message settled beneath Callista's cruise photos, marked with little gray "seen" ticks. No one responded, not a single reply. It was like my words had evaporated before they could be read, though I knew they had seen them. The excitement about a cruise had drowned out my achievement, and there I was, shouting into a void while everyone else cheered for a ship that hadn't even left the dock yet. The gut punch wasn't the silence itself. It was the realization that my milestone meant so little it couldn't even compete with lobster dinners and poolside drinks. Family group chats, I muttered to myself. They always reveal where the heart really is. I remembered Oprah's line, "When people show you who they are, believe them the first time." Maybe they had been showing me all along. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the cruise photos still seared into my mind. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe they were just swept up in the excitement. Maybe they'd come through. But deep inside, I knew better. I had seen the way their eyes lit up at Callista's announcements, how their messages overflowed with enthusiasm for something that erased me. If I were hosting a birthday cruise, I whispered, they'd all be on board in a heartbeat. Yet I clung to hope. I couldn't help it. A lifetime of being the responsible one had trained me to believe that if I worked hard enough, if I held on long enough, I would eventually be seen. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen. The tickets still sat on the counter, stacked neatly, untouched. My phone buzzed. Another post from Callista. "Countdown begins. Cruise in 3 weeks. # family first." I stared at the golden tickets, then at my phone. It felt like my graduation had already been erased before it even began. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had always carried a certain rhythm. Plates clinking, the smell of roasted chicken, the low hum of overlapping conversations. On the surface, it looked like any other suburban family gathering. I arrived carrying a salad and a folder tucked deep in my bag, the graduation tickets I hadn't yet given up on. The living room buzzed with chatter as cousins played on the floor, and Callista held court near the kitchen island, laughing as if the room belonged to her. I slid into a chair at the dining table, taking in the scene. They were discussing vacations, someone's new car lease, the latest neighborhood gossip. But not once, despite my graduation being only weeks away, did anyone bring it up. I tested the waters gently. I've been preparing for the ceremony, making sure the kids have outfits ready. My words hung in the air for a moment before my father cleared his throat and steered the conversation toward airline miles. My mother asked about a neighbor's retirement party. The silence around my achievement felt louder than any words they could have spoken. I sipped my water, forcing a smile, though inside I felt that same unease from the group chat creeping back. They could discuss a new yoga class in detail, but my 5 years of sacrifice couldn't even hold the table's attention for 30 seconds. Then Callista stood, raising her glass like she was delivering a toast. "I have something exciting to share," she said, pausing until all eyes turned toward her. She looked at our father with theatrical affection. "Dad's 70th deserves a milestone. We're going on a birthday cruise." The room erupted. My mother gasped with delight. My father chuckled, shaking his head as though humbled by her generosity. My aunts clapped. Even my kids, who had been slouching in their chairs, perked up at the mention of pools and fireworks. Callista wasn't finished. She painted the scene: departure from Navy Pier, fine dining every night, a spa day she had already reserved for Mom, fireworks over the water, even a captain's dinner requiring formal wear. "It'll be unforgettable," she said, glowing as though she had handed the family the moon. I sat frozen, the details swirling in my head. "Wait," I said softly. "That's May 15th. That's the day of my graduation." The laughter dimmed for a fraction of a second, but Callista quickly filled the silence. "A degree is great, but Dad only turned 70 once. We'll celebrate you another time." Her words cut with casual precision, like a blade hidden in velvet. And then came the nods, agreement rippling across the table as if her logic were undeniable. My father smiled faintly, saying nothing. My mother squeezed Callista's hand, eyes misting at the thought of her husband's big day. Even Lumen shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. I wanted to shout, to shake them, to demand they see the cruelty in what they'd just dismissed. But instead, I sat there, heart pounding, my plate suddenly tasteless. Betrayal didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered through agreement, erasing you in one sentence. Dinner continued with laughter and chatter, but I barely heard it. My graduation had been erased, replaced by champagne flutes on a ship I hadn't been invited to celebrate on. Later, as dishes were cleared and coffee poured, I pulled my mother aside. The kitchen lights glared harshly against her soft smile. "Mom," I began, voice tight. "I've worked 5 years for this. 5 years. Can't you stand up for me, just this once?" She sighed, patting my arm like I was a child begging for reassurance. "Sweetie, we're proud of you, but your sister already made plans. You'll understand when you're older." I froze. I was 35, with 2 children of my own, and she still spoke as if I were a naive girl asking for too much. Her tone carried affection, but underneath it was dismissal, a subtle blade cutting away my worth. She framed it as wisdom, as if setting aside my moment was an act of maturity I simply hadn't grasped. I stared at her, words clawing at my throat. "When I'm older?" I whispered. "How old do I have to be before what I've earned matters?" She smiled faintly, brushing invisible crumbs from the counter. "This cruise will mean so much to your father. You'll see." Her words landed heavier than Callista's announcement. Callista's dismissal was predictable, almost expected. But hearing my own mother reduce 5 years of sacrifice into something I should quietly set aside, that wound dug deeper than I cared to admit. Driving home that night, the streets blurred under the dim glow of the lamps. The folder with the 6 graduation tickets lay heavy in my bag, a weight pressing against my ribs. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, breath shallow. If they won't stand for me, I thought, I'll have to stand for myself. But I also knew the fight hadn't even started yet. The house was filled with the usual sounds of a weeknight, the dishwasher humming in the background, Bryson tapping away on his phone, Malis sprawled on the living room rug, sketching in her notebook. Lumen sat at the kitchen counter scrolling through his messages, his expression fixed in that distant way I had come to recognize as half-listening. I cleared the table from dinner, my mind circling back to the same thought that had been gnawing at me since the dinner at my parents' house. No one had even blinked when Callista announced the cruise. I decided to test the waters with my kids. "So," I said lightly as I dried the plates, "we should start talking about what you'll wear to my graduation. It's going to be a big day." Bryson shrugged without looking up. "Do we have to go? It sounds boring." Malis didn't even glance up from her notebook. "I don't know what to wear anyway." The words landed like little stones. I tried to keep my voice calm, steady. "It's not about fashion or boredom, it's about being there. I want to see my family in the seats when I walk across the stage." But the air in the room felt heavy, like I was the only one still clinging to that dream. The silence from Lumen as he scrolled on his phone deepened the ache in my chest. I knew teenagers often preferred fun over family obligations, but I had hoped, just this once, they would see past that. The next day, I came home from work to find the kids buzzing with energy, their voices overlapping with excitement. Bryson practically burst into the kitchen. "Aunt Callista said the ship has 3 pools, and there's going to be fireworks at night. She promised she'll get us matching hoodies with the cruise logo." Malis twirled into the room, grinning. "She told me she'd buy me a stuffed dolphin if I go. She said it's tradition that all the cousins get one." I gripped the counter to steady myself. This wasn't coincidence. Callista wasn't just offering them a fun trip. She was baiting them with gifts, dangling the kind of lures children couldn't resist. She was pulling my children toward her side of the line. "Mom?" Bryson continued. "Aunt Callista said we'll have way more fun on the cruise than sitting in a hot auditorium listening to names." Before I could respond, Lumen finally spoke. He gave a small smile, almost apologetic. "You know they'd probably have more fun on the cruise. It's just kids." My heart clenched. "Fun is temporary. Respect is lasting," I said quietly. "This isn't about ice cream or stuffed animals. It's about showing up for family when it matters." They all looked at me blankly, as if I were the one being unreasonable. I felt the walls of my home shifting around me, the foundation cracking. Callista wasn't only stealing my moment, she was teaching my children to believe I wasn't worth showing up for. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the graduation tickets. The silence in the house pressed on my chest. I thought of the laughter around my parents' table, how quickly my moment had been dismissed, and I realized Callista wasn't acting alone. The next evening, I dialed my father's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice warm at first. "Sweetheart, how are you?" I swallowed hard. "Dad, I need to ask you something. Will you please stand with me that day? It's just one afternoon. I've worked so hard, and it would mean everything to have you there." There was silence on the line. I could hear him breathing, the faint sound of the television in the background. The pause stretched long enough to hurt. Finally, he said softly, "Sweetheart, Callista has put in so much work. The cruise is set. We'll celebrate you another time." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. His words stung, but the silence before them was worse. It told me everything I had feared. This wasn't neutrality. It was complicity. "Another time?" I whispered. "There won't be another time. This is it." He sighed. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Your sister just wants to do something special for me." I thought back to childhood games, the times I had begged them to watch me at school events, only to hear they were too busy. Callista had been the golden child then, and nothing had changed. I was the responsible one, the one they assumed would manage alone. His silence, his refusal to fight for me, confirmed what I had long suspected. Loyalty in our family was conditional, and I wasn't on the winning side. After I hung up, I sat staring at the dark screen. Betrayal didn't always scream. Sometimes it came wrapped in gentle words that left you gutted. My father had chosen comfort over truth, harmony over justice, and in doing so, he had chosen Callista over me. As the night deepened, I opened my journal, writing furiously just to keep myself from unraveling. Eleanor Roosevelt's words echoed in my head. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I repeated it like a mantra, though the wound was fresh and bleeding. Maybe I needed to stop asking them to see me. Maybe I needed to stand tall on my own, even if it meant standing alone. When I closed the journal, I realized that something inside me had shifted. The pain hadn't lessened, but it had sharpened into clarity. I couldn't undo their choices, but I could choose mine. If even my children and my own father could be swayed away from me, what else would they take? The sound of forks tapping against ceramic filled the dining room, the television in the background humming with a game no one was truly watching. Dinner had started in silence, and the silence stayed. I sat across from Lumen, who kept his eyes glued to his plate, cutting each bite of meat as though it held answers he couldn't give me. Bryson and Malis leaned toward one another, whispering, giggling occasionally, but their eyes darted away whenever I glanced over. I tried to break the heaviness with small talk, asking about their school projects, how practice was going. They answered in fragments, barely above a murmur, and quickly went back to pushing food around their plates. The silence carried weight, not of peace, but of avoidance. It pressed on me until the air itself felt thick. I had promised myself not to let this pass without a word. I couldn't keep waiting for them to bring it up. Clearing my throat, I said carefully, "We need to talk about graduation." No one looked up. The clock ticked louder than the television, and I forced myself not to falter. "Lumen," I said softly, "you promised to be there. The kids need to see me walk that stage." He sighed heavily, putting down his fork. For a moment he rubbed his temple, and then he said words I'll never forget. "You'll have more graduations. Dad only turned 70 once." The clatter of Malis dropping her spoon punctuated his sentence. My heart froze. I stared at him, waiting for him to realize what he had just said, waiting for him to take it back. But he didn't. "This isn't about another diploma, Lumen," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. "Do you think I did this for a piece of paper? This is about respect, about showing up when it counts." He shifted in his chair, avoiding my gaze. "The cruise will be more fun for everyone. he muttered. I leaned forward. Fun. Fun is fireworks and pools. Fun fades the minute it's over. Respect lasts. And you're telling our kids that my sacrifice is less important than a party. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I looked at him, searching for the man who once told me I could conquer anything, who promised me he'd stand beside me. All I saw was a man choosing convenience over loyalty. I realized then he wasn't just excusing, it was betrayal dressed up in soft tones, and betrayal from the one you sleep beside cuts deeper than any insult from a sibling. Bryson suddenly chimed in, his voice louder than it had been all evening. Mom, everyone says you're too serious. Nobody likes celebrating boring stuff. The table went silent again, but this time it wasn't avoidance. It was the sharp quiet of words landing exactly where they were meant to wound. Malis giggled nervously, not understanding the cruelty but repeating the energy of the room. I stared at my son. The words weren't his. They were Callista's, slipping from his mouth like a ventriloquist's trick. My sister had already won part of the battle. She had managed to make me sound like the villain, even to my own child. Boring? I said evenly, though my heart ached. Boring is what paid for this house. Boring is what puts food on this table, what buys your soccer gear and keeps the lights on. Respect isn't boring. Bryson shrugged, dismissive, his eyes dropping back to his phone. The conversation was already fading from his mind, but it burned deeper into mine. I turned to Lumen, waiting for him to correct Bryson, to defend me, to set the record straight. He didn't. His silence was louder than anything Callista could have orchestrated. Another betrayal, this one carved by inaction. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it pressing down on me. My children were being pulled away, not by their own choosing, but by the ease of Callista's promises and the apathy of their father. My authority was slipping, my presence undermined inside my own home. The unfairness hit me in a wave. All my life, I had been cast as too serious, too focused, too responsible. And here it was again, thrown at me through the mouth of my son. Responsibility wasn't valued. It was dismissed, ridiculed, repackaged as dull. I thought of a phrase I had once read. Respect is earned in silence but lost in neglect. My family had normalized neglecting me for so long that they didn't even notice when they stripped me of dignity. I breathed deeply, holding the edge of the table to keep myself steady. Inside, a vow began to form. I wouldn't let them erase me this time. I wouldn't let their excuses, their justifications, their laughter at fun define my worth. This was the breaking point. The line between tolerating and resisting had been crossed. Dinner ended without further conversation. I cleared the plates, my hands trembling, though my face betrayed nothing. As I stacked the dishes in the sink, I said evenly, "If you all think fun is more important than respect, then you'll learn soon enough what it feels like to lose both." They looked at me, startled by the calm in my tone. But I knew, deep down, they weren't going to listen. Not until the lesson became unavoidable. I woke before the alarm rang, light seeping faintly through the blinds. My heart was already racing. Today was the day. I forced myself out of bed, repeating words I had been whispering to myself for weeks. Today, I prove all those nights weren't wasted. In the mirror, I pulled the gown over the dress I had bought months ago, a deep navy with subtle lace. The cap sat awkwardly until I adjusted it, smoothing my hair beneath. My shoes, polished until they almost glinted, stood ready by the door. The diploma holder, still empty but heavy with meaning, waited in my bag. I allowed myself a breath of anticipation. 6 seats had been reserved for my family in the front section of the auditorium. I pictured them filling those chairs, Lumen with his distracted smile, Bryson fidgeting, Malis clutching her program, my parents leaning close, Callista snapping photos. For once, I wanted them to look at me and see more than obligation. "Success is best when it's shared," Howard Schultz once said. That line echoed as I stood straighter, adjusting my gown. I clung to hope, even as doubts tugged at me. The university auditorium buzzed with life when I arrived. Parents carried bouquets, balloons bobbed above clusters of relatives, cameras flashed. Excitement rippled through the air as classmates hugged and posed, their families crowding around them. I found my row quickly. 6 seats, clearly marked with my name, sat empty, glaring against the sea of filled chairs. My breath caught. I scanned the crowd again. No Lumen, no children, no Callista, no parents. The seats waited, and no one came. A whisper behind me broke through. Who left all these empty seats? Another voice answered, half amused, half pitying. Maybe they're running late. I sat, hands clenched around the edges of my gown, forcing my face to stay composed. Inside, humiliation seared. Every cheer, every laugh from surrounding families pressed harder against the raw space where mine should have been. I wasn't missing family. They were missing me. When the dean called names, the auditorium roared in waves, families rising to shout, to clap, to scream the names of those they loved. Each burst of noise stabbed sharper, a reminder of what I didn't have. The cameras swept across the rows, capturing proud faces, waving arms, bouquets lifted high. And then they landed on mine. A woman alone in her reserved row, smiling tightly, pretending the emptiness beside her wasn't screaming louder than the cheers. I forced my lips to curve upward as the lens passed over me, but grief clawed under the surface. Envy burned hotter with each eruption of applause for strangers. I wished, just once, to hear my name lifted above the noise, to feel seen not only by professors or coworkers, but by the people I had sacrificed for. In America, graduations aren't just academic moments, they're family milestones. But mine had become the loneliest hour of my life. When my name was called, I rose on steady legs. I walked across the stage with my head high, even as my insides trembled. The dean's handshake was firm, the applause polite, the tassel moved, no cameras flashed, no cheers echoed my name. I smiled, dignified and steady, because I refused to let them strip me of what I had earned. My heart whispered a vow. Their absence will not erase me. Sometimes you have to be your own cheering section. I carried those words as my anchor. After the ceremony ended, I left the stage clutching the diploma case tightly, my hands trembling, though my steps never faltered. Outside, families swarmed the courtyard, taking pictures, showering graduates with flowers, holding them in tight embraces. I lingered near the edge, pretending to scroll my phone, hoping, against all reason, that maybe a message waited. There it was. And a notification blinked. My chest lifted with a fragile hope. But it wasn't congratulations. It was Callista's post. A photo of my family smiling wide on a cruise deck. Champagne glasses raised, my father in the center, my mother's arm linked through his, Bryson and Malis grinning in matching t-shirts. The caption read, "Family together is everything. Cheers to Dad at 70. I stood frozen, my diploma heavy in one hand, the glow of their smiles burning into my eyes from the small screen. While I stood alone under the spotlight, my family smiled for another camera miles away. Stepping out of the auditorium, I was swallowed by a tide of celebration. The sun shone bright over the campus lawn, bouncing off balloons shaped like graduation caps, bouquets of roses, and the shimmer of dresses chosen carefully for family photos. Everywhere I looked, graduates were enveloped by their loved ones, lifted into hugs, their names being called again and again with laughter and tears. I walked among them with my diploma clutched tightly in one hand, the stiff cover pressing into my palm. The smile I forced for classmates in passing photos felt brittle, hollow. "Congratulations," a friend said as we posed side by side. I grinned for the camera, but inside, it was as if I were a ghost drifting through the crowd. Everyone seemed to belong to someone, except me. I lingered on the edge of the lawn, trying not to stand out as the only one without a cluster of relatives nearby. I scanned the crowd, searching for a familiar face out of habit, though I knew none would appear. Every cheer from across the lawn pressed against my ribs, reminding me of the silence that had trailed behind my name when it was called. I checked my phone, maybe hoping for a message, a belated apology, something to hold on to. Instead, a notification flashed. Callista had just posted. Curiosity tugged at me, but the second the image loaded, it felt like the floor beneath me gave way. There they were, my entire family, gathered around my father on the cruise deck. Sunlight spilled across their smiling faces, champagne flutes raised, my children grinning in matching t-shirts. The caption struck like a cruel punch. "Family together is everything." Cheers to Dad at 70. Everything about the image was calculated, down to the tilt of the glasses, the effortless unity they flaunted. My family together, without me. The sting of those words was unbearable. I had just walked across the stage alone, 6 seats glaring empty in the auditorium, and here they were, broadcasting joy for the world to see. It was the exact opposite of my reality. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from a colleague. "Wait, your family skipped this. That's unbelievable." Another message popped up. "I saw the live stream. I thought maybe they were late. I'm so sorry, Sophie." I bit down hard, willing the tears not to fall in public. I would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. They could erase me online, but I would not erase myself. The laughter and shouts around me blurred into noise. I tucked the phone back into my gown pocket, each step heavy as I left the campus lawn. The photo kept replaying in my mind, each detail cutting deeper. The way Bryson leaned against Callista, how Malus wore a bracelet that caught the light, the pride in my parents' eyes as they toasted. That evening, when I opened the front door, I didn't expect to see them home so soon. Malus burst through the hallway before I could even put down my bag. She waved her wrist excitedly. "Look, Mom, Aunt Callista said this bracelet is way more special than sitting in a boring hall." She held out the flimsy plastic, the kind sold in bulk at tourist shops, but her eyes shone as if it were treasure. I bent down, forcing a smile. "That's nice, sweetheart." My voice wavered despite my effort. Inside, something cracked. Bryson wandered in behind her, holding a souvenir hoodie, the cruise logo emblazoned across the front. He shrugged casually. "Everyone had so much fun, Mom. You missed it." I stared at him, unable to stop the thought from tearing through me. "No. You missed me." My throat tightened, but I swallowed the words, knowing they wouldn't land. They had been fed a narrative, crafted and repeated until it felt like truth, that my graduation was trivial, boring, forgettable compared to the cruise, and they believed it. Later that night, I sat at the dining table alone. My diploma case lay open before me, the paper inside still crisp, untouched by the hands I had once dreamed would clap for it. Next to it sat the bracelet Malus had left, a flimsy circle of plastic glowing under the light. One symbol of sacrifice, the other of betrayal. Robert Louis Stevenson's words drifted into my mind. The cruelest lies are often told in silence. Callista hadn't needed to say I was boring. She had simply filled the silence with fireworks, gifts, and promises, and my children had learned to echo her truth. Callista hadn't only stolen my spotlight, she had rewritten the story, casting herself as the hero while painting me as the serious one, the one too dull to deserve a celebration. My children's eyes now reflected her version of me. I stared at the diploma, then at the bracelet, anger hardening into clarity. This was no longer about being included. The game had shifted. It was about reclaiming my dignity before there was nothing left to salvage. The house was still when I returned from campus, diploma case under my arm and exhaustion dragging at my bones. I had kept my composure through the ceremony, through the stares at the 6 empty seats, through the smiles I forced for colleagues who had come in place of the family that should have been there. But when the door closed behind me, silence pressed against my ears like a weight. I sat on the edge of my bed, gown still hanging loose, and reached for my phone. It buzzed before I could even set it down. A message from Callista. "Hope your graduation went fine. Kids are having a blast here. Nobody remembers graduations anyway." I read it once, then again, my chest tightening with each word. Casual, smug, cruel in its nonchalance. It wasn't the kind of wound that screams. It was the kind that slips in quietly, laughing at the damage it leaves. I stared at the glowing screen until the letters blurred. Sometimes betrayal isn't shouted. It's whispered, wrapped in mockery, and sent with a smile. Days passed, and soon enough, the family gathered at my parents' house for dinner. The cruise was over, their tans fresh, their voices buoyed by the afterglow of indulgence. Laughter filled the dining room as dishes clinked and chairs scraped against the floor. I arrived with my diploma tucked inside a leather folder, carrying it like proof that the last 5 years had happened. I sat quietly at the table while the conversation danced around me. Callista gestured with her fork, her voice commanding attention. The captain even gave Dad a special toast. The fireworks afterward, unforgettable. My mother dabbed her lips with a napkin, nodding. It truly was magical. My father chuckled. Best birthday yet. The others laughed, clinking glasses of iced tea, basking in their shared memory. I lowered my gaze to the folder in my lap. Not a single word about the graduation, not one question, not one acknowledgement. I was erased, even while sitting at the same table. The longer I listened, the more the air tightened in my lungs. In many families, silence can be sharper than any insult. Tonight, it was a blade. I shifted in my chair, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. The conversation rose in volume, stories layering over each other, everyone trying to outdo the other's retelling. I felt anger coil within me, a heat that didn't flare. It sharpened. Finally, I stood. Chairs squeaked as they turned to me. Slowly, I opened the folder and placed the diploma flat in the center of the table. The room fell still. Forks paused midair. The laughter cut off like a faucet turned tight. This, I said, my voice steady, is what I was doing while you were celebrating without me. For a long moment, no one spoke. My father shifted, my mother's hands folded and unfolded, but no words came. Callista smirked, breaking the silence. Well, we can celebrate you another time. I looked directly at her. There was only one time that mattered, and you erased it. Her smile faltered, but she said nothing. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavier than the laughter that had filled the room only minutes before. No one defended me. No one admitted what they had done. Their silence told me everything. They didn't forget. They chose. I left the diploma there, its presence louder than any argument I could make. That single piece of paper, 5 years of sacrifice, sat in the middle of the table like an accusation they couldn't look at. Elie Wiesel's words echoed in my head. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And indifference was the language my family spoke fluently. I gathered my bag, pushing back my chair. The resolve that settled in me was cold, but clear. I would no longer beg for their acknowledgement. I would no longer contort myself for scraps of recognition. Their silence had revealed the truth, and I would carry that truth as a boundary. I picked up my coat, my voice quiet but firm. If you wouldn't clap for me, then your silence will be my proof of who you really are. I walked out without another word, the diploma still lying on the table, their faces turned downward, caught in the stillness they had created. 3 days after the ceremony, when the sting of the empty seats still clung to me like a shadow, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Zinnia, my colleague who had attended the graduation in my family's absence. Thought you might want this. You looked incredible out there. Attached was a short clip. I pressed play and immediately felt my throat tighten. The video showed me walking across the stage in my cap and gown, my stride steady, my chin lifted. The camera panned briefly to the 6 empty seats at the front, rows reserved with my name attached, all of them glaringly vacant. The contrast was brutal, the sea of cheering families surrounding me and the hollow silence of those empty chairs. Zinnia followed up with another message. I'm so sorry you had to go through this alone. I stared at the clip, my mind whirling. Alone, yes, but not unseen. My finger hovered over the screen. I hesitated. Did I really want to make this pain public? Did I want to lay bare what my family had chosen? But then I remembered Callista's post, the smiling photo on the cruise deck captioned, "Family together is everything." My truth deserved to be seen too. I uploaded the clip to my account with a caption that came straight from the ache in my chest. This is what it feels like when your family chooses a cruise over your graduation. Within an hour, the notifications began. The clip spread faster than I could have imagined. First, it was coworkers and acquaintances, commenting and sharing with notes of sympathy. Then strangers began to appear, flooding the comments with words that made me feel both exposed and comforted. This broke my heart. Same thing happened to me. Family never shows up until they need you. That's strength right there, walking across alone. By evening, the clip had been shared thousands of times. The likes, the messages, the comments stacked so quickly that my phone buzzed nonstop. My private humiliation had become public property, and yet, alongside the unease of exposure, there was a strange relief. Finally, someone, even strangers, saw what I had endured. But validation comes with a price. I braced myself, knowing the family would see it soon enough. In modern America, social media often becomes the unexpected court of justice, and I had just placed my family's choices on trial. The following morning, another storm hit. A video surfaced from a cruise guest, someone I didn't even know. It showed my father, Avon, standing tall at the center of a polished dining hall, a captain by his side, the entire family raising glasses in a birthday toast. The camera caught Callista laughing, her arm draped around Malus, while Bryson shoved a second dessert into his mouth with no care in the world. The caption read, "They skipped their daughter's graduation for this." Priorities, huh? It spread like wildfire. The comments turned sharp, cutting in ways even I hadn't anticipated. Imagine erasing your kid like that. Shameful. She deserved better. No excuse. You don't need them, girl. We're proud of you. Callista's name began trending locally, attached to words like selfish and attention seeker. My family, who had erased me with silence, was suddenly exposed for the world to see. I scrolled in disbelief. My humiliation had gone global, but so had my vindication. The same image that had once crushed me, their smiling faces on the cruise deck, was now being dissected by thousands, a symbol of betrayal. My phone buzzed with another notification, this time from the family group chat. The messages flew fast. Mom. Sophie, how could you? This is private family business. Callista. You made us look bad on purpose. Who shares this with strangers? Lumen. We should have talked about this, not blasted it online. I stared at their accusations, my pulse steady now. They were angry not because I had lied, but because I had told the truth where others could see it. Their silence had been their shield, and I had torn it away. I placed my phone down, breathing deeply. This was never my plan. I hadn't wanted revenge, only recognition. But Elie Wiesel was right. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And their indifference had pushed me here. Louis Brandeis once said, "Sunlight is the best disinfectant." As the notifications poured in, I realized that this storm was not an accident. It was the natural consequence of years of silence and favoritism. I closed my laptop, the phone still buzzing beside it. The world had seen my silence. Now my family would have to face it too. When the invitation came, it wasn't warm, it was curt. A message from my mother. We should all sit down and talk. Come for dinner Sunday. After the viral storm, after the endless comments, the headlines in local feeds, the last thing I wanted was to sit at their table. But something inside me knew I had to. If I avoided it, they would paint me as cowardly, guilty. And if I went, maybe, just maybe, I could say what needed to be said out loud. Walking into their house that evening felt like stepping into enemy territory. The smell of roast beef and potatoes wafted from the kitchen, but instead of comfort, it carried tension. My parents wore stiff smiles, their voices pitched a little too high as they welcomed me. Callista was already at the table, her laugh ringing out as though nothing had happened, as though the internet hadn't just ripped her apart. Lumen sat quietly near the end, his gaze dropping when he saw me. We sat down, plates passed, food served, and the small talk flowed unnaturally. My mother asked about the weather, my father mentioned baseball scores, and Callista gushed about a new real estate listing. Not one word about the viral clips, the humiliation, the truth that had spilled into the open. I kept my hands folded in my lap, the folder with my diploma resting against my leg. I listened, my heart beating steady, knowing this charade couldn't last. Tonight, silence would not protect them. Halfway through the meal, as plates clattered and the smell of gravy filled the room, I set my fork down. Without a word, I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed my diploma right in the center of the table. The sound of it against the wood was sharp, final. "This," I said calmly, "is what I was doing while you toasted champagne. This is what you chose to erase." All conversation died. My father froze, his fork hovering above his plate. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Callista blinked, then leaned back with a smirk. "We said we'd celebrate later," she scoffed. "Why drag this out? Can't we just enjoy dinner?" I looked at her, my voice cold and even. "Because later doesn't exist. You stole my one moment, and you laughed while I stood alone." The silence that followed was dense, suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. I could feel their discomfort, their guilt, pressing into the walls of the room. But still, no one defended me. Americans admire restraint, I reminded myself. Screaming would only give them ammunition. Calmness, measured, deliberate, made every word cut sharper. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth had already landed. Finally, my father let out a long sigh, the weight of decades in that sound. "I should have been there, Sophie," he said, his voice low. "But your sister planned everything. The cruise was set. I didn't want to disappoint her." I stared at him, my stomach hollowing. Those words weren't an apology. They were confirmation of what I had always known. "You never worried about disappointing me," I said quietly. "Not once." He lowered his eyes, unable to meet mine. My mother reached across, her hand brushing the edge of my plate. "Sweetheart, families fight. We need unity now, not division." But her voice rang hollow, a script repeated too many times. Callista stayed smug, hiding behind his excuse, her silence louder than her earlier smirk. I thought of all the years I had swallowed this dynamic, told myself I was imagining it. But here it was, spoken plainly. I was always second to her. My father's loyalty, my mother's patience, even my children's laughter, they had all been bent toward Callista's gravity. "Silence in the face of injustice is complicity," I whispered, half to myself, half to them. No one answered. I sat there, the weight of his confession settling into me. This wasn't a victory. It wasn't healing. It was just proof. The kind of proof that left you numb. There was nothing left to argue for. Nothing left to win. I reached forward, sliding the diploma back into the folder. My movements were steady, deliberate. "I needed to hear it out loud," I said, my voice even. "Now I know where I stand." I rose from the table, the scrape of the chair harsh against the floor, and gathered my bag. Their faces were pale, silent, caught in their own unease. But I didn't linger to absorb it. As I walked toward the door, one thought pressed clear in my mind. They had chosen their side, and now I would choose mine. The silence that followed the dinner confrontation clung to me for days. I walked out of my parents' house with my diploma folder under my arm, their stunned faces still burned in my memory, but once the door shut behind me, I knew nothing had changed. Their guilt hadn't turned into recognition, it had only turned into anger. By the next morning, the family group chat lit up. "Mom, you embarrassed us. That was cruel, Sophie." "Callista, you've always loved playing the victim. Now you're dragging us through mud online?" Lumen, "We should have handled this privately. You went too far." I stared at their words, thumbs hovering above the screen, but I didn't type a single reply. Silence became my weapon. Let them rage in their echo chamber. I had no interest in defending myself to people who never defended me. At work, I buried myself in tasks. Long hours at my desk, extra effort on presentations, late nights drafting proposals. My promotion was on the horizon, and I leaned into it as if it could fill the cavern their betrayal left inside me. My colleagues asked questions, tiptoed around the viral posts, but they offered kindness, support, the sort of acknowledgement my own family had refused to give. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, staring at numbers on a spreadsheet, the thought rose unbidden. They made me the villain for speaking truth. But villains don't build scholarships. I had been preparing something quietly, long before the cruise and the empty seats. It was time they learned about it. A week later, another invitation came. My father wanted everyone together again, to heal. They expected me to apologize, to smooth things over, to play the dutiful daughter who absorbed all wrongs. But I walked in with a different plan. The dining table looked the same. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a pitcher of iced tea. Faces stiff with politeness, smiles brittle. I set my bag down and joined them, listening as they tried small talk. Halfway through the meal, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Not the diploma this time, but documents tied neatly together. I placed them in the center of the table. This degree wasn't just for me, I said, my voice steady. It was for my children's future. They glanced at each other, wary. I've spent the last 5 years building more than a diploma. I built a scholarship fund, a future fund for Bryson and Malis, so they could chase education without fear of debt. Every paper I wrote, every late night, every sacrifice, it all went toward this. The room was silent. My children looked at me, wide-eyed. Callista shifted uncomfortably, her smirk faltering. I leaned closer, my tone hardening. But respect must come first, and I will not waste it on those who mocked sacrifice. The words landed like stones dropped in water, sending ripples across the table. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father blinked, unsure of what to say. Lumen's face went pale. Callista snapped, her voice tight. You can't hold money over them, Sophie. That's manipulative. I turned to her calmly. You held fireworks and t-shirts over them. You bribed them with souvenirs while erasing me. Don't lecture me about manipulation. The silence that followed was deafening. For once, the power was mine, and I spoke it out loud. Later that night, after the confrontation settled into a cold quiet, I sat at home with my laptop open. My inbox pinged with a new message. It was from Zinnia, my colleague. Sophie, I just want to say how proud I am of you. You're the first in our department to balance full-time work, raising kids, and finishing an MBA with honors. You inspire me. If your family can't see it, know that others do. I read it once, then again, tears filling my eyes. The validation, coming from someone outside the tangled web of blood and loyalty, pierced deeper than any hollow apology my family could muster. Americans often find chosen family among friends and colleagues, the ones who show up, who celebrate you without conditions. And in that moment, I realized mine had already chosen me. I closed the laptop slowly, breathing evenly. What you allow is what will continue, I whispered to myself. I could no longer allow them to erase me, to set the narrative. Boundaries would define my future now. My children would have to learn respect if they wanted my support. I didn't need their applause anymore. My achievement stood on its own. Finally, someone saw me. Peace settled in my chest, but I knew the war with my family wasn't over yet. The question remained, could I forgive, or was walking away the only way forward? The morning after the scholarship confrontation, I woke heavy, as though the silence from last night had followed me into sleep and pressed down on my chest. My body was exhausted, but it wasn't only physical. It was the kind of weight that comes when you've said everything you needed to and still realize the people you love are unmoved. They saw me now as the betrayer, the one who had turned against them. Yet I couldn't shake the bitter irony. I only mirrored what they had done to me first. I dragged myself through my morning routine, coffee in hand, hair pulled back, my suit jacket buttoned with mechanical precision. When home feels like a battlefield, even the office becomes sanctuary. At least there, I knew my effort was measured by deadlines and reports, not dismissed as boring or too serious. At least there, I was not invisible. Still, beneath the rhythm of work, the questions clawed. Was I becoming exactly what they accused me of? Cold, unforgiving, distant? Or was I simply reclaiming the dignity they had denied me for decades? By midweek, I found myself walking toward the university again, clutching a small card in my purse. It had been months since I last visited my professor, Narina, the one who had written my recommendation letters and encouraged me every time I thought I couldn't finish. After the scholarship reveal, I needed grounding, not from family, but from someone who had witnessed my effort without prejudice. Her office door was half open. She looked up from a stack of papers and smiled warmly, though her eyes immediately caught the heaviness in mine. Sophie, she said gently. Come in. Sit down. I sank into the chair across from her desk, the weight of the past weeks spilling over me. Before I could even form the words, she continued. I saw the clip, she said. You walked that stage with more dignity than most people could ever muster. Tears pricked at my eyes. Unexpected. I swallowed. It didn't feel dignified. And it felt like no one cared, not even my children. Narina leaned forward, her voice calm, steady. That's not true. They may not understand now, but they'll remember one day. More importantly, you must remember now. Dignity isn't given, it's lived. Her words landed with the precision of a compass pointing north. She went on. You've built something remarkable. You've shown resilience, Sophie. That is your legacy. Not who sat in the seats, not who clapped. Resilience. For a long time, I sat in silence, letting her words sink into places my family's silence had hollowed out. Professors in this country often become more than teachers. They become anchors for adults like me, returning to school mid-life, balancing families, jobs, and studies. Narina had seen me as more than a role to be dismissed, and in that moment, I felt seen in a way my family had never allowed. When I left her office, the spring air felt sharper, cleaner. Her words echoed with every step. Dignity isn't given, it's lived. Walking down the campus path, I recalled a quote she once shared in class. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Marianne Williamson's voice rang through Narina's, and now through mine. My family's neglect hadn't diminished my power. If anything, it revealed it. I had walked across that stage with my head high, alone, yes, but also unbroken. Their absence did not weaken me, it unmasked them. For so long I had convinced myself that recognition from them was the prize, that if they finally saw me, I'd feel whole. But strangers online had given me more acknowledgement in 1 week than my family had in a lifetime. My professor, my colleagues, they gave me what my blood never did, honest recognition. I realized I no longer needed their applause to feel worthy. I no longer needed their permission to exist fully. That evening, as the city lights blinked awake, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. Family can be chosen. Respect can be demanded. And love, real love, never makes you beg for crumbs. I wrote the words slowly, letting them carve a new path forward. Seeds of independence sprouted in the quiet. Career, friendships, maybe even a future where my life was less tied to their approval. My children would one day need to learn that respect must be mutual, not assumed. But for now, I would stop chasing what was never freely given. Later, I closed my notebook and looked out at the skyline, Chicago glowing with possibility. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, I wrote on the last page before bed. Forgiveness is deciding I won't let them define me anymore. The question that lingered was no longer whether I could stand alone, but whether I wanted them beside me at all. When I pulled into my parents' driveway a week after the scholarship reveal, the air felt heavier than usual. The house stood there, quiet but tense, as though it too expected some final judgment to be handed down. I had not spoken to any of them since that night, and still I wasn't arriving to beg. I carried no apology with me, no explanation to soften their anger. I was there to finish this. Inside, the atmosphere was as tight as a coiled spring. Everyone was already seated at the dining table. My parents stiff, Lumen withdrawn, Bryson and Malis unsure but silent. Callista sat at the far end, leaning back with her usual smirk, like she had already won the fight and was only here to witness my collapse. The meal was served with forced politeness, hands moving food from platters to plates in mechanical silence. Not one eye met mine. The expectation lingered in the air that I would bend first, that I would fold under the weight of their disapproval and restore their fragile image of unity. But I sat calm, spine straight, every part of me determined. I was not there to beg. I was there to end this. It didn't take long for the dam to break. You embarrassed us, my father said finally, his voice cutting the silence. Do you realize the damage you've done? People in our community talk. My mother shook her head, her tone tight with disappointment. Dragging family matters onto the internet, Sophie. That's shameful. Families are supposed to protect each other. Callista chimed in with a smirk. No, Mom, she wanted pity. That's what this was. Sophie thrives on being the victim. Dad's 70th mattered more than some piece of paper. The words stung, but not because they were true, because they revealed exactly how little my sacrifice ever mattered to them. Truth isn't pity, I replied, my voice calm but edged with steel. Truth is what you chose to ignore. While you were clinking champagne glasses, I was walking across a stage alone. You erased me, and now the world knows it. You've always been dramatic, Callista scoffed, always craving attention. Dramatic? I leaned forward, my tone sharper. No, what's dramatic is decades of favoritism. Every excuse made for you, every sacrifice brushed aside because Sophie will manage. Sophie doesn't need the support. Sophie doesn't need applause. Well, I did need it, and you chose not to give it. The table shifted uncomfortably. My father tried to interject, his hand raised slightly. That's enough. No, Dad, I cut him off. It's not enough, not anymore. You've spent a lifetime making sure Callista was celebrated, and I was silenced. I've lived in that shadow long enough. And I'm done. My mother opened her mouth, but the words faltered. The truth had landed, and there was no defense strong enough to cover it. I felt years of swallowed resentment rise to the surface, each word a release. You talk about family unity, but unity built on erasing one member is nothing but tyranny. You want to call me ungrateful? No, I am the one who built myself from scratch. I am the one who carried responsibility while you handed out excuses. I am the one who deserved a family in the audience and instead got 6 empty chairs. The silence that followed was brittle, ready to shatter. Callista's smirk flickered, her confidence faltering as the weight of my words pressed down. I stood slowly, gathering my bag, my breath steady. My children's eyes followed me, confusion and awe mixing in their expressions. My parents sat frozen, their forks untouched. For the first time in my life, I held the power in that room. I turned to them, my final words deliberate, every syllable landing like a gavel. Next time, I won't save seats for anyone. Whoever wants a place in my life must earn it. The silence deepened, no laughter, no excuses, just shock. Callista let out a strained laugh, but no one joined her. The sound died quickly, swallowed by the truth that now hung between us. Strength surged through me, not loud, not fiery, but clean and decisive. This was my closure, my mic drop. I walked out, leaving their stunned faces behind. When I returned home, I carried my diploma into my office and placed it on the shelf above my desk. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was a symbol of my worth, carved through sacrifice. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, from Narina, reminding me of something I finally believed. I was seen. Blood had failed me, but chosen family never had. Self-respect never had. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, and walk away. The quote echoed in my mind as I stood by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline lit up against the night. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their applause. My life would not be built around their approval any longer. I thought back to the rows of empty seats, the image that once felt like my undoing. Now, it felt like the start of my freedom. I stepped outside, the cool air brushing against my skin, and drew in a deep breath. The night stretched wide, full of possibility. They lost me the day they chose a cruise, I whispered. I found myself the day I chose to walk away. And with that, I walked forward, unshaken.